The man I'm going to introduce you to now didn't realize that when he was accepting the VVA Leadership and Excellence in Science Award last year at our leadership conference in Tucson, but he was rehearsing for giving the keynote speech today. I'm pleased to say he passed the audition with flying colors. I know a lot of you will be pleased to know that after he finished high school, he joined the United States Marine Corps. He went on to serve in the Vietnam War as a corporal, where he volunteered to work with Vietnamese children during his free time. He then graduated from the University of Hawaii and from Penn State University with an MS in 1971 and a PhD in 1974, and then joined the faculty of Purdue University's Department of Child Development and Family Studies. In 1977, he established the Family Research Institute, and in 1978 wrote Stress Disorders Amongst Vietnam Veterans, which helped recognize PTSD as a psychological condition for the first time. He co-founded the Society for Traumatic Stress Studies and the journal Traumatology, and has published more than 267 scholarly works, including 25 books and 168 journal articles, focusing primarily on stress and resilience of individuals, families, and communities. In 2004, he was awarded a Senior Fulbright Research Fellowship to conduct research in Kuwait. A former professor in the College of Social Work at Florida State University, today he chairs and directs the Tulane Traumatology Institute at Tulane University right down the road here in New Orleans. Please welcome your keynote speaker for VVA's 18th National Convention, Charles Figley. And I want you to get this again. This is a scientist who was a Marine.
This is a very big audience. I go to conferences and people come and listen to my research findings. There's probably this many people right over there, maybe 35 to 40 or so. Thanks, John, for the introduction. Thanks, Mark Leipson, for getting me here. Welcome to New Orleans again. This is the greatest city I've ever lived in, although my hometown still is Tallahassee, Florida, right? My wife wants me to say that. It's a real honor, really, to be here. This reminds me of my going to the first time, the Marine Corps birthday ball, right over here in the Superdome. And it's one of the reasons why I was impressed by that ball. It's the first time I've gone, and I met so many other veterans. And it's interesting, it's the same way here. I've felt a connection with my military experience and my military commitments, but not as a human individual Marine. It's more as a scholar, as a researcher, because when I left Vietnam, I was committed to helping those that I left behind, not just the Marines, but also the kids that I met over there. But all of the years that I've been doing this research, I've never really attended a conference like this. I've never really interacted with so many Vietnam veterans. And I found myself tearing up from time to time when people were talking about various things in their own life. And I think that's probably why, because a personal side of me is so connected to the past that I haven't really focused on. And so when I was at the Marine Corps birthday ball, I began to circulate and talk to other people. It was an interesting and wonderful experience, but there was some challenges in getting there. And my wife, Kathy, if you mind standing, she gave me permission to tell this quick story about our going to this ball. Now, we were invited by a new friend of mine. He's a colonel in the Marine Corps. Now, how many of you were enlisted when you were in the service? I don't know about you, but I still feel nervous talking to officers. I don't know why that is, but nonetheless. But he was a student in one of our graduate programs, Disaster Resilience Leadership, and Mark's a good guy. So we were happy to go to the Marine Corps ball as his guest, so he would be waiting there for us. So Kathy wanted to get all dressed up and dolled up like most women do, many women do at least, certainly Kathy does. and doing all of the hair preparation, etc. And she asked me, pick up my dress because I'll get out at 4 o'clock and that's when they close. So, any time during the day, 4 o'clock is fine. So 4 o'clock ran around, I got a phone call. I know you guys know where I'm headed. Yes. Did you pick up my dress? I didn't answer immediately. No, I did not. She said, I'm on my way over there now. So she was going to go over there, knock on the door, break the door in if she needed to get her dress. There's no doubt about that. So she called me later on and said, they're closed, but this is what you're going to do. We're going to go to the mall and buy a new dress. You ready? So we did, and it worked out fine. We were on time, in effect, but the last little element of this was that I arranged an Uber car so we could drink as much as we want and, we could be brought back. So the Uber driver showed up. Now this, remember, was a ball, and she's all dolled up, and she came, especially for this. It was a pickup truck, actually. It was a nice pickup truck. It was very elegant, but we laughed about it later on, and just adds to the story, I guess. But what did you say? Yes, she had a new dress. She has now 2 dresses, exactly the same. But hey, so we arrived at the Superdome. It was a phenomenal experience. It was the largest gathering in New Orleans in terms of the Marine Corps Ball. We made it. Everything's fine. There's Colonel Boone, multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan within the reserves. But he introduced me to a lot of people, especially Marines. And I got to know a number of people there and connect with them. And found out about their homecomings. How many of you had a fantastic homecoming and you wouldn't trade it for the world? Raise your hand. Look around. Raise them high. I remember being in the back of the room and I asked a question this size of room. He says, could you stand up, sir? And I says, I am standing up. What? So this experience of the homecoming is something that I wanted to focus on now. Many people talk about feeling like a stranger when they come home. There are so many things that have changed since that time. This is, of course, a Norman Rockwell painting of homecoming Marine, and this was, of course, after World War II. And this is a poignant and lovely and sweet picture of the crowds moving around and wanting to talk to this young man who had come back from the war, maybe even on leave, but I think he came home. And I want you to think of something that I talked about in my second book called Strangers at Home, Vietnam Veterans Against the War. Because there are 3 phases associated with the homecoming. Phase 1 is disengaging from the war, mentally as well as physically. So it is, critically important, etc., to be able to separate. And think about World War II. I know you all have talked about this already, but they came back basically in troop ships. They had plenty of time to talk to each other. I had the red clay of Vietnam under my fingernails when I came home. We came back that quickly, and some of you may have come back even faster than that. Phase 2 is the re-entering of civilian life. And this takes a long time, as I discovered. I found myself wanting someone to break into my place. I was never afraid again in that regard. There were numbers of things. I think I mentioned I think one of the reasons why I was invited here is when I talked about when I was in Tucson during the VVA's meetings there, I only said a couple of things, and the one thing I said is, I did not have a fucking clue what the hell was going on after I left Vietnam. I thought I did, but I didn't. And of course, that's one of the reasons why I started studying in this area, is because I can't be the only one that's experiencing these things. And the final phase, and I'll talk about this mostly at the end here, because I only have 15 minutes, is achieving a new level of self-integration. to integrate and to feel that you're integrated and that you have a new self. It's not the old self that you left. It's the new self that includes your military service and includes the shit that you had to deal with when you got home. Am I right or not? So Rockwell talks about something in his paintings that are very, very important. How many of you had fathers who were in World War II? Raise your hand. Most of you in this room have raised their hand. They went through very similar kinds of experiences that we did because things changed when they were gone. Now, maybe they were gone longer than some of us, but probably not for many of you in this room. The homecoming is an important part of reconnecting with supporters, of family and friends. In 1944, during the war, a sociologist called Alfred Schutz wrote about the, quote, homecomer, and pointed out that the homecomer recognizes that time has marched on and that family, friends, children have changed. And similarly, he or she has changed, but they can't really tell because they probably don't look older, but they feel very much older. My sister said to me, she was like 3 years younger than I am, and she felt that I had kind of pushed her away and didn't want to have anything to do with her during high school. But when I came back from Vietnam, I was really glad to see her. And our relationship actually started from that point in time. But time marches on while we're away. But not everyone experiences a great homecoming, and definitely not Vietnam veterans. The homecoming for Vietnam veterans, as you all know, was you were damn happy to be back, but kind of confused about what things were going on, not quite sure because you've never done this before. The realities of what you experienced started sinking in. You began to feel safe, and as a result of that, you probably slept better, but at the same time, what kept you up were those weird, strange, crazy experiences that you had overseas and coming home. So the goal was to feel safe and helping and to get help in reconnecting, of catching up on what had happened since you left. Homecoming from active duty is the same kind of thing. I had a year at Cherry Point, North Carolina before I left the military in 1967, 50 years ago. It's really remarkable. And I think that's one of the reasons why my emotions are more on edge now than they normally are. Because when I look into your eyes, I see myself. I see the past, and I see the present, finally. So what our job here in terms of the homecoming is to move forward, to focus on the future, to try to translate our military experiences and achievements into something tangible for our career, for being a civilian. And for me, I started college. I was at the University of Hawaii in 1970. I went in 1967, actually, we arrived there. And I didn't know any Vietnam veterans at the University of Hawaii. I didn't even know they existed. When I was at Cherry Point, I was one of 2 Marines who had been to Vietnam a long time ago, in 1966. So I definitely felt like a stranger at home, where I was supposed to feel at home. A very important study was published this year, but I've known about it for a long time. It's a follow-up of a study that I participated in and I assisted in as a part of a VA working group. And as you see here, it's a predictors of PTSD 40 years after combat, findings from the National Vietnam Veterans Longitudinal Study. So they went back and they studied the same people that were studied back in the 80s. And they found a number of very important factors associated with predicting PTSD. One of the only four variables that accounted for most of the variance with regard to PTSD symptoms of these 700 follow-up. There were 1,600 originally. And guess what that factor was? It was about the quality of the homecoming. Quality of the homecoming. because the quality of the homecoming suggested how appreciated you are. The quality of the homecoming is associated with your outlook on life, your ability to incorporate your military experiences, to not be ashamed because people were marching against the war, because they had, in those days, mixing up the war with the warrior. Exactly. So it was very important. And the homecoming is extraordinarily important, therefore. And we found that not only in this study, but we found it in a study that we're conducting. We haven't reported it yet. We just developed the initial drafts, and it's really focused on the homecoming. So we are able to do something in now and in the future about those people that are coming home and being appreciated. Because the critical element of the homecoming still applies to current veterans that I'll talk about in a second. This is Joe Boscarino. Joe, as you see here, is a Bronze Star winner, Army combat veteran. Joe and I met each other way back in the 70s, and he, like me, were researchers interested for our own sake on what's happening with military veterans. I never got any pay for doing this. This came from my heart. This came from my patriotism and my love for Vietnam veterans and all veterans who risked their life for us. But he said, as you notice here, as I described here, that in the interviews that we have been conducting, the interviewers reported back, most of the Vietnam vets had really no emotional reaction to their war stories. They talked about it before. It was sort of matter of fact. Where they broke down, almost every one of them, was when the interviewer asked them about the homecoming. And the interviewee thought about, like I thought about, that particular war and that particular experience that we've had as Vietnam veterans. And they broke down. Most of them did, in terms emotionally, just like I was tearing up over here in hearing about these things. Because the homecoming is the end of a lengthy separation from the family and the world. And then during that time, people move on, as I mentioned before. There I am, ladies and gentlemen. Don't I look the same as now? Yeah? Sure. I was able to get some mini ribbons, and I didn't wear it because I wasn't sure of what the culture is and the acceptability, but John Rowan's wearing one, so I'm going to do it myself. It was my friend Mark was able to get those for me, but when you wear these minis, you don't wear your expert badge and expert pistol. I feel more proud of that than anything else. I didn't touch a weapon before I went in the military, and it really says something about Marine Corps training to turn some knucklehead like me into an expert marksman. It's amazing, in my opinion. So the critical thing, the most important thing that's been found all along with regard to the active ingredient of why the homecoming is very important is making a connection, or reconnecting with people that you knew and reestablishing a relationship with them. I have numbers of friends who never went into the military as part of my 58 people who graduated from my high school class, and there's still huge differences between us because of the experiences here. So the idea here is connecting and telling them what has happened and what your experiences have been and how that relates perhaps to them. So many of our generation was at least ambivalent about the war. We had to deal with friends who we graduated with that did not go in the military and maybe went to Canada or started marching in opposition to us, not just the war, which continues to annoy me for a long time. This was conflated from their hatred again of the war. They blamed us in many ways, and it was very hurtful. And as a number of speakers have said today, our generation of veterans made a difference in changing that and not letting that happen again, right? I mean, it was a pretty bad time, 63 to 73. The unemployment rate was high. The generations were separated as a result of the war. The college campuses, I got out 3 months early from the Marine Corps in order to join Ohio State University in their quarter, and there were demonstrations. There were demonstrations the next day. So it was a challenging time. And then when you add to that our generation, the killings at Kent State, the killing of Martin Luther King, of Bobby Kennedy, all of those things left us like, is this the way things are supposed to be with this kind of chaos? Although we're heading in that direction fairly soon, I would say, in terms of how things are looking, given with North Korea. So we experienced a rough homecoming, but as a result of that, we made a difference. In 2007, I published this book, Combat Stress Injuries, with a colleague of mine, a psychiatrist in the Navy, but on the green side. He was dispatched as a psychiatrist with the Marines in Iraq. He won a Bronze Star. What we discovered from this research and what we published in this book is really associated with the homecoming, to the extent that we identified it as a major factor and one that should be involved whenever there's any kind of assessment or history. Anyone who's doing that interview, whether it's clinical or not, they need to ask about the homecoming. But we made the difference. We stopped that. Now, every time there's a troop ship, that plane that flies in, there's someone to greet them. And I know that the VVA is one of the most aggressive, and even though other war eras can't join this organization, they've done a tremendous job of reaching out to younger veterans, and I hope that continues. Because these three phases of the homecoming provide a way forward to providing this kind of support for those that are coming home. Because the notion of the phase one, disengagement from the war, they came back so fast. Many of them had some kind of orientation, which is good, but not enough at all. I don't have time to talk about this, but there are a lot of other models. The British Marine Corps, for example, keep them in a unit before they come back, and more often than not, try to come back as a unit. So we can play a role in enabling these vets. And I wanted to also talk about how other veterans, it's so delightful to hear that you're studying secondary traumatic stress reactions, because in effect, the families are the ones that get this secondary smoke, if you will, right? The people that are smoking is one thing, but the people that smell it, they can pick up all of these things that we often can't notice ourselves. So I want to say that the families deserve the respect that we receive because they are veterans too, right? When I went to Florida State University in 1989, I was shocked to find that there was no veterans organizations, campus veterans organization, because the war had been over for Vietnam for some time, but the new war was starting fairly soon. As you probably have heard this particular quote many times, home is the place where when you go there, they have to take you in. And it is a special place, obviously, home. And for many of us, we didn't really feel that we were taken in, by our generation at least. And that's something that we have to work on, again, for the future generation. We established with the help of these young combat veterans, and as a matter of fact, the brother of my son-in-law, as it turned out later on, we established the Collegiate Veterans Association. Are any of you connected with any veterans organizations on campus? Raise your hand. Okay, great. Keep going. It's a wonderful opportunity. I felt pretty much lost when I was at the University of, certainly Ohio State, and including the University of Hawaii. I mean, I worked full-time at the Royal Hawaiian, so I didn't have a lot of free time. But if I had just known one other veteran, I think it would have helped. But that was, pretty much right after the war. In conclusion, I'd like to thank you again for inviting me and awarding me last year of the Science Award. It means a great deal to me. It means that my people think that I'm good, that I've worked, that I've made an achievement, and it means so very much to me, and I appreciate it. I hope that you'll enjoy this city. This is a city that I love very much. I only live maybe 5-6 blocks down Canal Street, and I work maybe 2 blocks away from there. So it's a wonderful place. I hope that you, in the conference, that you'll talk about your own homecoming and compare notes with those that you're talking with. I hope you will continue to support younger veterans as you already have. And this observation by Robert Frost, I think, is important because we need to know what other veterans will take them in, and as others have taken us in. Let us work even harder to connect the younger vets and let them know that we are happy to take them in and to be fully integrated into America. Welcome home. God bless you. See you.